Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. I'm excited today. We have Dr. Simeon Hein, the author of Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles and Resonance, also the author of Planetary Intelligence, 101 Easy Steps to Energy, Well-Being, and Natural Insight. Dr. Hein is the founder of the Mount Baldy Institute for Resonance in Colorado. He teaches remote viewing. He is also doing crop circle tours for those of you that are interested in that in July in England. We welcome you to It's Rainmaking Time. Thank you for being here to discuss resonance and bringing this subject into a clear frame of reference for the public. Thank you, Dr. Hein.
Well, thanks for having me here today, Kim.
I think the first thing that really struck me in your book was that we're conscious of 0.1% of the information that comes in every second. You say 16 out of 40 million bits.
That's
and
right.
I wonder if you could speak to that to just begin to open the field for people about this.
Right. Well, this is based on, the work of the Danish science writer Tor Nørretranders. There have been a lot of studies in human, cognition and brain physiology. And what the researchers have found, really surprisingly, is that we're not really conscious as much as we think we are. It's an illusion, because most of what the information that comes into our awareness every second is deleted by the subconscious mind and the conscious mind too. So all we're left with, everything you see around you and hear and are perceiving right now, is just a tiny fraction of a thousandth of a percent of all the information that's available to you. Which means we're basically, like Tony Robbins used to say, we're deletion creatures. He didn't know how right he was.
Why do you think it is that way? And why do you think that's where we operate from? Do you think it's like a natural thing that we're built that way, we were arranged that way, we were born into the world that way?
Well, it does have to do with the way nature designed us, which is pretty much, it's not that long ago that we were like animals in the forest, And when you're living in a survival-based situation where things can change in a split second, you pretty much need to focus on just what's important at the moment. And so nature designed us to just focus on our physical senses mostly because the fight or flight response and basically what you need to survive on the savannah or in the plains or wherever you're living. But now we're obviously, as an advanced civilization, or like some of us would like to believe we're an advanced civilization. You wouldn't always believe that if you look what we do every day. But where we are now is we're not in that fight or flight situation all the time. We're not constantly in a survival situation. So there's more opportunities to make more use of the information that's available to us in terms of subtle energy and resonance and so forth. But it just basically, because of survival, we're physiologically designed to throw away information that isn't necessary. But there's another aspect to it, Kim, which is very interesting. And it's something that I mentioned in Opening Minds. It's that society trains us from a very young age to decide what is real and what isn't real. And so by a very young age, because of what we've been taught around us, we're kind of hardwired to see certain things as real as certain things as not real. These studies were done at Harvard with kittens, and they found that kittens raised in a room just with vertical stripes can never see horizontal objects again.
That's fascinating, and I love that in your book.
Versa. Yeah, so there's a certain processes that nature built into us, and there's also physiological processes from our perceptual conditioning when we're very young to delete things that we don't think are real. Now, the thing about this is by the time we're a certain age, right, just a few years old, from a variety of these processes, what we think is real is kind of hardwired into us, and we can never really see anything outside those boundaries again unless we have some sort of training to really expand our, lens and our veil of perception.
I loved your fascinating example in the book where you showed that the indigenous peoples during times of Columbus and other explorers didn't see the ships coming in because they weren't wired to accept ships as a reality. Talk to that for a moment. This is an example of what you're talking about, too.
Yes, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. We always like to believe that we're somehow more advanced than those people hundreds of years ago that the European explorers encountered. But we react the same way they did to the ships of the explorers, Magellan and all the others. They all reported this to some extent or another, which was that when they would show up, they would kind of keep their boat anchored out in a bay somewhere off the coast, and they would go in with rowboats or canoes, something like that. And the indigenous peoples couldn't see the ship. They would see like what they thought was like a mountain out on the water, but they couldn't make sense of it. And it was usually the medicine man who had some training to go beyond the narrow perceptual boundaries that the tribe had grown up with, who could see it first for what it was, and gradually over a period of a couple days explain what it was to his comrades. You know, and we're the same way. If you think of all the phenomena that we see around us, people take pictures of things and then they say, I don't remember seeing that when I took the picture. I think you know what I'm referring to. There's so many pictures like that and experiences. So we have to think, well, if we're like the indigenous peoples compared to the explorers, and we're being approached now, if this is happening by other visitors, then we're really not going to see it for what it is really either. We're going to have our own kind of story imposed on whatever's really happening out there, because it takes a while to reorient your perception, if it even happens at all.
You speak in the book about this new paradigm, this multi-dimensional resonance. I want you to explain this to the public, because to the extent all of us don't get this, we miss everything from that point forward. Can you explain it?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Kim. That's the real point. Our science has been based on a certain mechanistic paradigm. You know, we're all familiar with this paradigm. It looks at things and nature and the world around us as if it's a machine made up of parts that interact in a very linear, predictable way. You know, this paradigm has invaded biology and medicine, even ecology, and for a long time, physics. And it became so successful because it worked very well at the level that it was designed to work at. I mean, if you're sending someone to the moon or something, that paradigm still works very well because it describes how physical objects move in a gravitational field. But if you're talking about the more complex interactions of biological and living things, that paradigm completely breaks down, and it actually causes a lot of damage. You can see some of the effect on this type of thinking on some of the ideas that we now ridicule in medicine about what they doctors used to believe made people sick. You know, it wasn't even until very recently that people even realized that bacteria caused infections, or that, you know, we were affected by our environment. It used to be believed that, you know, there were these 4 different levels of humors in the body, liquids, and if they got out of balance, that's what made you sick. And that's what led to the introduction of bleeding, or even the use of putting mercury into people's bodies, for heaven's sake, to make them better. These we now all see as superstitions. But at the time, they were seen as the height of, you know, medical knowledge. And so this idea of seeing the human body as just a mechanical system that had to be balanced out like a machine really caused a lot of damage. And there's some estimates that say that until about 100 years ago, medicine killed more people than it saved. And there are even studies now that show that millions of people have still died in about a 15-year period from iatrogenic diseases, you know, diseases that people get in hospitals, or faulty
You mean
diagnoses.
like staph or something like that travels through the hospitals?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that is a direct, you say, well, how does that relate? It's a direct result of the mechanistic paradigm of the idea of using antibiotics and antibacterial soaps, which we now know it kills a lot of the bacteria, but the ones that survive now have no competition. And they're the meanest, baddest ones on the block. So you've just basically multiplied them. MRSA is a good example of this. You know, this flesh-eating bacteria. There's lots of examples like that, tuberculosis and other types of diseases, now that no antibiotics, in some cases, in some countries, there are no antibiotics that work against them anymore because the antibiotics have been used so indiscriminately. In other words, our idea that you have these magic bullets that can just kill all the bad bacteria is a very mechanistic way of looking at it. You know how the latest idea thinking about this is that antibiotics are part of nature, but they're not used. Organisms use antibiotics to communicate with their neighbors in the soil. Can you believe this?
No, I didn't know that.